Welcome to Operation Successful Transition. In this podcast, my guests and I will be talking about the 4 pillars of housing, work, benefits, and mental health to open doors for veterans and connect you with the people you need to meet. We deeply appreciate your service and sacrifice and hope to help make your transition back to civilian life smoother. Your success is important. You are important. Hey everybody, Sherri Echols here with Operation Successful Transition. I'm so excited to have you here today and really super excited about my guests. My guests today are Ken and Carolyn Ballinger. Is that the right way? Or is it Ballinger?
Ballinger.
Ballinger.
Oh,
Yeah.
Ballinger. Sorry. Yep. Okay, let me get closer here then. All right. Ken and Carolyn Ballinger are the co-owners and co-founders of Northern Pines Canines. Ken brings to the table over 40 years of multifaceted canine experience spanning law enforcement, military, and the private sector. He's an experienced trainer and a respected breeder for working dogs with European Sport Dog and Police titles since 1984. So he's got a long-held specialist status here. He's done lots of different jobs and is including holding senior positions such as senior tactical trainer at the United States Special Operations Command at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and the director of canine operations for Blue Force Development Group. Carolyn, is a veteran Marine with 5 years of Special Operations Forces experience and 17 years of active duty military leadership and contingency and crisis operations. I'm super excited to have you guys here today. Ken, it was nice to meet you. I got to meet Carolyn at the Entrepreneur Boot Camp for Veterans this January, and it's great to see you again. So tell us some more about your service and what you've done with the dogs and the different things that you've done in the military for us, and a little bit about your transition then maybe.
Yeah, so initially was a communications officer, commissioned from the Naval Academy, and about 6 years into my career, became a cyber officer when I went to Joint Special Operations Command. Led the defensive team there, and subsequently selected to go lead an offensive team for the same command. So, got a lot of great experience being able to do cyber for very tactical, focused operations. But that's when I met my husband, Ken. He was a working dog trainer, like you talked about already. But yeah, I think really from a transition standpoint, for both of us, it was important to be back in New England, since Kenny has children with his ex who are in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and wanted to be able to have that family aspect beyond just really awesome professionally rewarding career. But for me, it was kind of just time to be able to have the family aspect as part of my life's journey.
Yeah, nice to be back home, and it's a good thing too that you guys also had a kind of a business started already, or at least an idea of it. Ken, how about you? Tell us a little bit about.
So I'm second generation doing this. So pretty fortunate to have my dad, who's 80 years old, just turned, and he's still training dogs, believe it or not.
Wow.
Definitely as much as he was before. But so he was a pretty noted forward-thinking dog trainer in the 70s, and started most of the canine programs for law enforcement here in sort of the New England states. I got to chase him around the world as a kid. I probably appreciate it far more now than I did then. But got to really be in the mentorship and around people that are legends, and you can only read about in books now. They were very mentoring and nurturing to me on sort of my path doing it. When my dad did retire, I took his job. And basically carried on there and did about 24 years in law enforcement, and then retired from that. Went into the to the development of canine technologies, so implanted technologies and wearable technologies for dogs. I think in the sort of early teens of the thousands, 2010 or so, we were probably a little bit ahead of our time. Still a little bit too big brother for most people, a little scary. But that once that sort of ran its course, then went and stood up the U.S. Marshals Special Operations dog program and got it all the way up through Congress as a program of record. And then from there, went down to the Joint Special Operations Command to work down there for 5 years. So a good life for sure.
Very cool. It sounds like, so your dad started this. So was he the one that started in 84? Or
He
that's what
was,
you did?
yeah. So he was a Navy EOD person back in the 60s. And his dream always, he went to agriculture school, ironically, and his dream was always to work with animals. And
Yeah.
so at the time, it was right around, mid to late 60s Vietnam. A lot of the veterans that were coming back were like my uncles and my dad. They went right into law enforcement. And so one of my uncles was a local legend and chief of police and was very mentoring to my dad and basically got him started in the dog and security business. And then from there, my dad went into the law enforcement, I think on or about 1970, 71.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting. And I'm sure he's proud to have you as a legacy, both in the military and in taking over the family business then.
For sure. I hope I do him proud every day, for sure.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. As a mom, there's not much our kids can do that can keep us from loving him and being proud of him. But having them follow in your footsteps. My younger daughter works with me, and I'm real proud of her too. And my elder daughter's stepping, forging her own way. But it's amazing to see what these kids do, as I'm sure with your kiddos.
Sure, for sure. And we definitely have, a couple of them that have they've got the dog gene for sure. So,
Yeah.
but they're also young teenage girls. So we'll see if we get a fourth generation out of it. We'll see. But they definitely have it's been genetically passed on for sure.
That's awesome. Teenage girls can be fickle, but they come back around.
Sure, for sure.
Well, that's awesome. Great. Um, so why was it that you came to the boot camp for veterans? What was it that you were hoping to learn to grow your business and, what's in the business for the future that you see?
Yeah, so part of the kind of the set transition program, leaving active duty, did the SBA's Boots to Business. It was a kind of a nice, overview, but certainly 2 days was just, the very tip of the iceberg. So
Sure.
having done some additional, just Google searching to figure out what else is out there for veterans who are interested in starting a business, came across the IVMF program that included the entrepreneur boot camp for veterans.
Mhm.
And so that's how I ended up, just finding out about the program. And for me, it's certainly along the lines of, hey, yeah, I've led companies in the military, but certainly companies in the private sector are vastly different, right? From a budgetary standpoint, your customer standpoint.
Right.
So just wanting to be able to seek out mentors like you who've been there, done that, have already kind of figured out a lot of very salient lessons learned already. Just as much as possible, like try to, rather than reinventing the wheel, what can I gain from folks like you,
Yeah.
who've already kind of hit these roadblocks, have at least some advice and wisdom to pass on. And if I can take that on with me, like like the book that you recommended, kind of
Yeah.
not have to start from scratch and kind of learn from what's already out there, even better. Certainly for the business, we established the LLC back in August of 22. After I had already submitted my papers to say, hey, I'm starting a different chapter of my life.
Yeah.
But from an operational standpoint, it was, once I had started my terminal leave that we really, got things in motion, put money into infrastructure, and, started kind of sourcing clients. So from being an operational standpoint, yeah, pretty close to like 9 months now at this point. So we're still fairly new from the Northern Pines Canines business perspective.
Okay.
But as you heard, Kenny talk about, like, he's definitely not new to this game. Being second generation, handlers, trainers, breeders, really wanting to kind of bring back, I think, the legacy of what the working dogs that his dad used to see, that even he saw as, in his kind of earlier days in his career. He definitely got to see them at the place that he worked when I met him.
Mhm.
Those are very, very special and few and far between dogs. And, I think part of this for me, being a disabled veteran, like there are so many people who can benefit from having real dogs who can perform in real life situations. outside of, the really high-end military or law enforcement use cases.
Right.
And actually one of our puppies from our latest litter, she just went down to Connecticut with a puppy raiser, and there happened to be a pretty traumatic fatal car accident, and she's a 6-month-old puppy, is providing comfort services. And at least feedback that we got from our buddy down there is she was performing better than these professionally trained adult dogs.
Oh, wow.
Right.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some dogs just seem to have a sixth sense about people's emotions, and they're very sensitive, and I guess better at giving to the person. My dogs are sensitive to when I'm so upset, but they're like, here, pet me, you'll feel better. I'm
Sure.
like, it's a little different, but um, so that's amazing. And I know you talked about not every dog can be the really elite. And there's usually more than one dog in a litter. So what's the average percentage on litters? Is it like the 80-20 rule, or?
So I think it's pretty subjective, right? The biggest thing that's happening now, Sherri, across the world with working dog genetics is they're very thin. And there's a bunch of reasons for that I won't go too in depth with, but in general, us and all of our partners around the world were at war for 20 plus years, right? And so it was dogs play a major role, not only in the special operations community, but also in the day-to-day military operations, right? And so everybody, there was really, no lifeguard on duty at the gene pool, first and foremost. So that the breeding wasn't as strict and as controlled as maybe what it was even, in my heyday of running around Germany in the 80s, where it was a very, very controlled thing for the positive, right? To make sure that just because you had a dog and I had a dog, we weren't just producing dogs that were eventually
Right.
going to not have some level of good health and good mental health and good working genetics. And
Yeah.
so, and then I think one of the more kind of things that accelerated the process, believe it or not, was COVID. Because in Europe, where all of these dog sports have been around since, honestly, the 1800s, if not, the late 1800s,
Mhm.
the mean age of all these people that are the so-called experts are in their 70s now. And COVID really shut down Europe as much as it did here. So
Yeah.
all these
Yeah.
people that, these dog clubs that have existed for hundreds of years, they were suddenly shut down, right? And then you've got all this knowledge that is institutional knowledge that people that have been doing it 50, 60, 70 years that is dying on the vine. So lack of genetics, that really accelerated the process, right? As
Right.
a mean number for special operations world, roughly, if we were sourcing dogs, I personally would not look at 10,000 dogs to get one, but maybe 100 people looked at 1,000 each to give me, to whittle that down where I'm only looking at 300 dogs to get one, but that was sort of the number that we went by. And so clearly, to your point, those are very special dogs that have to have, amazing resiliency, very clear, almost human-like ability to, dogs don't think they do, but to process, right?
Mhm.
And not be overly reactive. And so that's the curse there. The benefit that we have is having worked down in that world, we have a very intimate relationship with them, right? So I tease because I say like most of the folks down there are like my kids, right? So and so about 20 years older on average than most of them down there, and we laughed, cried, bled together, lived together for for years, right? And so we have a close connection to that community that has excellent genetics in their dogs because the selection criteria is so high. And then working with the vendors, the best vendors in Europe, we select very, very good females of high genetic predisposition. And they may not be technically working dogs, but they come from excellent working dogs. Their character is excellent. Their mental health is excellent. And their physical health is excellent. And so to answer your question, what we do is the cream rises. And so when we have these dogs that are of superior quality, either for tier 1 law enforcement, FBI, HRT, US Marshals, National SWAT Team, ATF, or the tiers in the military, those dogs they're pretty clear that and we'll sort of select them for that purpose. And then to your question, we've got all these other dogs that are wonderful dogs. But now what do we do with them? And so
Mhm.
what we do is we sort of we laugh sometimes. We say it may not be, you know, the dog for a tier one military unit, but he's still an amazing dog, right? Or she's an
Right.
amazing dog. And so we sort of put them in the places that they are best fit. It could be regular law enforcement, it could be explosives, narcotics, firearms detection, search and rescue. What is an interesting part for us is that the sort of the service industry has found us as of between our connections and reputation. We've sort of, you know, recently gotten into people coming to us and asking us about dogs for autism support, for seizure detection, for
Yeah.
all of those sort of medical uses for dogs. So that's our sort of third tier. And then just our great pets, right? Like that they're the best dog you're ever going to have because they've got this wonderful genetic predisposition that exists there. And we do a lot of imprinting with the puppies during all that selection process over that first 8 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And so we really know in the end, we're not putting square pegs into round holes, we're putting square pegs into
Right.
square holes, round ones into round ones, triangle ones into that. So it really gives us a little bit more of an advantage. I think our, you know, 3 to 5 year goal is to put some gas back in the tank for those tier one dogs, right? Those highest level dogs, because it's pretty hurting right now. But in that, we don't want to, you know, we still got all these other great dogs that we find purpose for. So
Yeah. Yeah. So the the older the older generation, the European group, is that all recovered and back in operation? It seems like
it is, right? But
during
that
COVID, those
COVID
people
was
died off.
COVID was
And
interesting, right? Like, because a lot of these folks, you know, like when we say it all the time in breeding, but I think also with humans and dog breeding, but with human behavior, form follows function, right? And so when you remove some of that form, right, then function gets watered down, and all of this wonderful generational knowledge that I was so lucky as a kid and as a teenager. Great opportunities, like ones that you know, I can't even, there's so many of them, I can't even remember them. That was just my normal, right? Those people don't exist as much anymore. And COVID accelerated that, I think, interestingly. And now we're working with a skewed set of genetics, right? So dogs that the example I tell folks all the time, I can remember driving down the road in the mid to late 80s in Germany and all over Europe, and you'd see a person walking a German Shepherd down the street.
yeah.
Everybody spoke English because it was such a high military presence there. It's Cold War time, and you could pull over and say, "Excuse me, ma'am, can I test your dog? I'm here from America, searching for police dogs."
Right.
And you literally get, because genetic predisposition was so high that, you know, the cost of the dogs and the function of the dogs, cost was minimal, function was super high. Then Gulf War One happened, right? And then, you know, like when prices come up, they never come down. I can remember all of the benchmarks that, you know, during my career, and certainly my parents, my dad's career, my mom was equally as part of all of this too, as the brains behind the outfit, like Carolyn. But you know, I can remember these like benchmarks of, oh my gosh, I never thought in a million years I would see this in my lifetime. It is at such a, it's like a snowball now that is unstoppable. The snowball now is the size of a, you know, a Mack truck, and it's rolling and it's impossible to stop. So that's really our goal in that way. And fortunately, I do have a lot of that same experience, right? And we are in a very intimate community of people that have similar experiences. So it's going to hopefully be a few people. I don't want to say rescue, but like to be able to make a concerted effort, to be able to at least, again, as a 3 to 5 year goal. When I was approached about this 2 years ago from that community, I was like, ooh, you know, we're going to get the 1s and 2s, right? But the goal is to get, you know, 3s and 4s per litter, but we're 3 to 5 years from that, right? Because we've really got to put a lot of gas back in the tank,
Right.
and rely on, we live in the YouTube world, right? I like one of my examples that I tell people when I'm training their dogs is like, I know nothing mechanically about vehicles, but I save us several $1,000s a year by YouTubing how to change a part, right? Unfortunately, with the dog world, there's a lot of that out there now, where and a lot of the trainers, right? These younger people in Europe that are doing it, they have very limited knowledge, right? But their genetics are high, so they get marginal results, right? And so we're trying to put I guess, some institutional knowledge, and I think the word culture is overused in this day, but I think get some culture back into it. We came from a world of absolute culture, right? Like the culture that my dad, as an example, in law enforcement created, all I did was improve hopefully upon that, right? And so, but on
Yeah.
that military side of where we were fortunate enough to work, it's culture, right? It's culture, 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 and it's proven. There's a common phrase: everything is proven in blood, but it's also proven, because of process, right? And so, I think that that's what is lacking as a rule in the Europe has it, but a lot of those older folks are not doing it anymore because
Right.
the necessity has gone away. There's so many animal rights groups now that don't want dogs to be used to serve mankind, right? So when you take away that function, form goes away, right? So it's a two-sided
Yeah.
sort of seesaw, right? And if we get heavy on one, the other will suffer, right? So it's just trying to get that balance back.
Yeah. Wow. So many things in there. So I guess, part of the wonder is, did these older European people have a protege that they were, pouring this information into, like your dad did for you?
Well,
Or
I think again, I'll reference like the 80s, right? So there's a sport in Germany and in most of the European countries. It's not called Schutzhund anymore, but the literal translation in German is protection dog, right? And it just meant it was the Dutch and the Germans and the European countries in the 1800s. They gave the public, they made a set of rules, both for breeding and working testing, to be able to say produce dogs for public service, whether it was for the police, whether it was for the military, the railway police, for border protection, like all of those different things. And so, it was a hand-in-hand program where civilians could do it. In the 80s, when you would go to a Schutzen club in Germany, it was akin to going to like Little League baseball in America. There was such a culture around it. On Friday, you went there and it was youth day. All the kids learned how to teach a dog to sit and how to have, a relationship with an animal and care for it and love it and teach it basic things. And then on Saturday, it was family dinner at the Schutzen Club once again, right? And it felt like sometimes you were only gone 6 hours and you were back at the Schutzen Club again during those weekends. And then there was a training group that would meet on Wednesday for that purpose. So there was this really deep culture, what I sort of at the time, I guess, dismissed as my normal. Now it's the sports are the interest from younger people doesn't exist there. And if it does, it's that marginal sort of YouTube dog trainers that are
right.
out there, where they know just enough to be effective at one thing. We tease all the time that one of these days we're going to do a seminar about nothing, right? Like just say, hey, here's
Like
all of our
Seinfeld, yeah.
experiences, right? And then just say, ask me a question,
Mhm.
right? And even challenge people. We're just talking about this before we get on with you about saying it's free. And if you like us, come back and train, right?
Yeah.
To be able to say that, we can answer, we've got so much depth of experience, right? That we can pretty much get you on the pathway from the most simple thing to the most complex thing that, we would get our dogs down at the highest level of the military to be able to do.
Yeah. But I didn't think about the animal rights people, but it doesn't sound like to me like these animals are being abused in the least. It sounds
Oh
like
my gosh, no.
they're definitely revered and treated very well.
Oh my goodness, yeah, right. And they're life saving, right? That's the part of
Yeah.
it that people, it's never what you see, it's what you don't see, right? That's one of my phrases that Carolyn hears me probably say too much to people, right? It's never, don't ever judge me on what you see me do. It's the things that you don't see me do, right? As I retired, fortunately with a lot of rank like Carolyn did, and as I went up the command staff ladder, it was more important for me to be relevant with the guys and gals that I was teaching, and I had to be the person with the best dog, right? Because I wanted them to want what I had. And I would always say to
Right.
the folks, like, don't ever judge me on what you see me do, right? You see blips and but I want you to want what I have, but you have to put in that sort of process and time on the other side of it. So I think I was having an interesting conversation Monday with a local state police organization. And we were talking about dog genetics, ironically, how it's getting harder and harder, even for local law enforcement, to get the dogs that were readily available. He relayed to me that he's had to put off classes for 2 years because he doesn't want to water down their standard of the dogs that they expect, right? And so, and then sort of unsolicited, he said, we see the same thing now with some of the people that we're getting, as potential recruits, right? There's that sort of, I guess, general softening of what was readily available, I guess, 10 years ago, even. It's been pretty amazing. Again, I can't say it enough. I don't think I ever would have predicted in my lifetime, what I've seen happen in 3 to 5 years as far as working dog genetics, it's very low.
Wow.
And so
It's
what they do is they sort of move the goalposts, right? They're like, oh, we'll just water the test down, right? Or we'll do I always say that like 18-minute abs, right? Well, I'll just do 17-minute abs, right? Like there's always like this, and then okay, for a year you're better than me, and she comes out with 16-minute abs, right? So with dog training, there are things that good dog training is good dog training is good dog training. You know,
mhm.
I would humble my guys all the time and say probably the two most humbling experiences that I had was the World Herding Championships in Belgium, cattle dogs in
Yeah,
Shelties. And I was like, I know nothing about dogs. How do
that's
you get dogs to do that? And I
that's
would tell my
amazing
guys,
to watch. Yeah.
right. I would tell my guys, go next time the circus is in town, when circuses still did it, like go watch these people. And there's little dogs that were rescues that are jumping through rings of fire with an elephant sitting next to them and lions screaming at them, 1,000 people eating food around them, and they
Right.
perform flawlessly, right? That's
Yeah.
good dog training. It's good technique. It's things that work. And so yeah, that's a whole probably other problem. But you know, as far as you know, I think it does exist fads in dog training sometimes, but ultimately, if you stay in it long enough, you will all come back to the same place. Good dog training is good dog training is good dog training. And what
Right.
works for the Dutch herding dog works for a dog at the circus, works for a police dog, works for a dog working for the military.
Yeah. I see that. And yeah, the cattle dogs. I've been to the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo and watched
Oh,
them do
sure.
thing, and it's just by a different tone in the whistle, or I don't even know
Yeah.
what. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
It
I've
was,
got
and it was, I was during that event, I was dumbfounded. And we were very fortunate because the person that brought us there was the head of all the dog training in Germany for the police, and had been doing it at that point, probably 60 years. And he gave us like this intellectual experience, like it pouring rain, it was crappy out. It was in, you know, late October, early November in Belgium. And it was one of the more humbling experiences. Like I literally took a step back from everything that I thought I knew. And I can remember saying to the gal, she was probably not more than 25 years old, that won it. I said, how did you make that happen? She said, genetics. And she said, watch. And so she asked somebody else to let out a trailer full of sheep, and the European sheep are about the size of American cows, and they're
mhm,
nasty and ornery. And she took an 8-week-old puppy out of a crate and she let it out. And she said, watch. And this dog had so much genetic predisposition. It was literally running these sheep and about with zero training whatsoever. We see this in our puppies, right? We call that the cream rising, right? Like there's
yeah.
just this intuitive dog, to your point, right? Or this dog that just has absolute different character and drive and temperament than the other dogs in the litter.
Yeah, exactly. I've got a rescue, I believe in rescuing instead of letting them, so I get a kind of the grab bag of all the stuff that's happened to them. But one of my dogs is Blue Heeler Australian Shepherd mix, and I've never trained him to do any healing or anything, but he heals the other dogs. They have little scars on
Yeah,
their ankles from him, and he'll
yeah,
do it to people too. Not so much anymore. He's older now. He has some arthritis, but when he was younger, yeah.
yeah. We've got two of the puppies that we're keeping right now for hopefully one will go. It's a female and she is an exceptional dog. And then the other was going to the gentleman that runs the Folds of Honor chapter for the New England states. And so, but they are notorious healers. I have to catch my breath at 6 o'clock in the morning in the dark when I'm going outside with them, because I'm getting the boop, 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 right foot light, like
Yeah.
it's, and I'm like, oh, they're
Yeah.
only 12-week-old puppies. I'm just going to try to catch my breath and not be upset with it. But yeah, but predisposition, right? So yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the dogs you raise are also predisposed in that way, and it honors them to train them farther and develop those capabilities for them. Back again to the animal rights people. I really just disagree that this is any problem for the animals at all. I think they're born to do this. They want to do this, and you're helping them to flourish in what they're born to
For
do.
sure, because to your point, Sherry, like they have this noise inside their head, right? That the
Yeah.
universe has made them this way, right? And that noise unassigned can become neurosis, it can become destructive behavior, it can become dangerous behavior. And so when you appease that and put some words to the tune that's going on in their head, then their world rather is harmony, right? I don't generally like the phrase of, oh, it's, like you'll hear every adoption, oh, he just needs a job, right? Like, well, every dog needs a job because at some point it was developed, for that purpose, right? And even if it's not a purebred dog, it is come from something that was at some point. And so maybe it's a little guy in the back of the room in the dog's mind that's saying, hey, we should chase those sheep. But
Right.
that noise is still there, right? And so we can either turn that noise up or turn that noise down and assign some words to it and create good behaviors and as opposed to being sort of fighting the bad behaviors or if not creating bad behaviors ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess, the average person, homeowner, family person who has a dog doesn't train him to excel. They train him to not, not attack people when they come to the door, not tear things up, not eat shoes, that kind of thing. We just don't even have this idea of the higher purpose that these dogs can have. I think a lot of
Sure,
people.
and I think there was always some balance, and again referencing my experiences in Europe, that when the breeding was very very tightly controlled by not necessarily the government but by organizations,
Mhm.
um, there was expectation on everything: the mental health, the physical health, the working health of all of these dogs, right? And it could be a herding dog, right? All of those things were regulated so that function was very very high, and when you have high function, the dog won't last in those functions if he doesn't have good form, right? And so the damaging part of it is sort of my parents my mom especially was a very, very noted German Shepherd breeder through the late 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Mhm.
And all of the dogs that were considered working breeds when we were growing up were losing Dobermans, Rottweilers, like Labs in some cases, Golden Retrievers now, unless you're going to a hunting kennel where they're fielding their dogs, right? All of that function went away because they were heavy on form, right? And people think, well, we've got some years before it happens. It literally, my opinion is if you don't, use that function, it disappears in a generation, right? And it just becomes
Yeah.
this wild noise that's in the dog's head, and then all of a sudden shelters are more full, right? So I think it's about having some level of balance to it, being ethical about it, being have some level of regulation to it. Don't just be like, well, let's just make more puppies, right? Like that's as we sort of get more into the service animal side of things, we've gotten some very interesting results from the same litter. We have dogs that they're capable of doing very dangerous and powerful things, right, for military or law enforcement.
Yeah.
And then we've also got the most empathetic and beautiful. Carolyn jokes all the time, and she says, "How the heck did we make snuggly Malinois, right?" Like, because most people like Malinois sleep with their eyes open, right? So,
Yeah.
and it's that balance between having the form and function going all the time. Right now, I think we're a little heavier on function because of the highest level of folks that we're sacrificing a little bit of our stuff to be able to augment, that never-ending search for dogs for the highest level of the military.
Yeah. Wow.
I think, too, you brought up all of your dogs are rescues, and I think that's great and fine too. Like now my husband also has a rescue that I got when I was stationed down at Fort Bragg, and she's a fantastic dog, but it's also pretty clear that she's a hot mix of whatever happened to crop up in the wilds of North Carolina.
Whoever jumped over the fence, right?
She's
We call it the North Carolina trash dog. Yeah.
she's a great living dog, but she's definitely not, gonna be doing the same, level of jobs that our other puppies that we've, bred for a purpose are gonna be able to do. Yeah, ever. But I think but it still comes back to, like I'm trying to come up with a good visual for this, but really it's two sides of the equation, right? Like there's the genetics of the dog, and then there's, you as the owner or handler, training and working with your dog to really get that whole piece right together. Because, regardless of if you've got a, papered, titled, purebred dog, or, just your local shelter pup who's happy to, just be a lap dog, you still need that foundational base of training, because otherwise, between you and your dog, one of you is going to be crazy with
Sure. Yeah.
inappropriate,
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
boundaries that aren't set, and I think it just
Yeah.
it makes the entire kind of dog community better, right? Just having that kind of appreciation for that balance of genetics and also, your ability to have a foundational and good solid relationship with your dog.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to Carolyn's point on the rescue, so we also have a good background in that as well. So starting in the late 90s, when that first big crunch for law enforcement, at least here locally in the New England area, where they were like, well, we don't have the budgets, we still need the resource, but we don't have the budgets. And so like, and again, is our sort of tactics and the way that we were doing things and what we were required to do was mostly based on the opioid crisis up here, which it definitely hit geographically the New England states pretty hard initially because we are a sieve because of all the coastline as far as being able to get illicit drugs in. And so I went to the shelters and started, just pulling dogs out. And I think probably before I retired, I'd done close to 80 dogs. We call them our United Nations of dogs, and they are, I think most of them are pretty close to being retired now, but they were brilliant dogs, right? They were the problem dogs that people couldn't live with because they had this massive noise in their head, right? And all we had to do is assign them, well, if you just go find this gun or go find this bomb or go find this cell phone or go find this missing child or go find these drugs, and all of a sudden their lives were cleared. I was very fortunate in the late 2000s to work with Stephen Latham from Shelter Me, which now I think is a PBS program, but I think I did one of his first episodes. And we brought all of our United Nations of dog, looked like the Land of Misfit Toys from the cartoon, big, small, and everything
Right. Yeah.
between. Dogs were doing wonderful and heroic things, right? So, they were taking more drugs off the street than people would ever realize, finding guns from crime scenes, cell phones and electronic media from people that were doing dangerous things to children, explosives certainly, missing people. Maybe, unfortunately, some of those missing people were maybe expired, but it was it was a sad situation for us, but gratifying to be able to give the family some level of closure.
Closure. Yeah.
Sure, for sure. So yeah, I think we've got like a not a super long-term goal to kind of partner up again that way there. I know with this part of the business, like if we ever get fortunate enough that we're so big that we can't produce enough puppies to do that, we're pretty selective on the puppy side of it. But I know that for the shelter organizations that I worked with in Massachusetts, like they loved it because when I adopted one dog, when that dog graduated school, and every single time he found a missing child or found drugs or found a gun and took it off the street, their adoptions would go through the roof because that was my promise and guarantee to them. Help us find these dogs. Give me the first call, and we'll help you guys out on the backside of it there. So I think there's something that we've, as a longer term goal right now. To Carolyn's point earlier, it was infrastructure, right? I think initially we were kind of, she's the business genius for sure on this, but we were going a little faster than our ability to support it, right? Like we used to call it as a cop, don't drive faster than your headlights, right? So I think that as a longer term goal, it would be nice to be able to kind of do that, to be able to help those dogs that are in some cases. COVID again was interesting in that regard because so many people were home for 3 years that would have never had a dog, and all of a sudden the shelters that wouldn't adopt dogs a year before were, because they didn't meet their temperament criteria and their testing and all that. Now all of a sudden, those dogs were in, with somebody, and Carolyn said it, like either the dogs were transferring their crazy to people or the people were transferring their crazy to dogs. The last couple of years were wild for me as a dog trainer, having been training dogs for obedience and helping people with temperament issues with dogs for close to 50 years. My dad and I would always joke at Thanksgiving, we'd sit around the table. Oh, remember that terrible dog 5 years ago? Now it became the reverse. Like, man, we would cringe and say, oh, we've been lucky. We've gotten like 3 good dogs in this cycle of dogs, right? Because it seems like because of genetic issues and these dogs that were, probably not maybe suitable in 3 or 4 years ago, pre-COVID, to be adopted out without a lot of strict training and behavior modification. They were out there, right? And then all of a sudden everybody went back to work.
Yeah.
And so So yeah, there's a whole lot, but I do like the shelter piece of it too, you know, so.
Yeah,
for sure.
I love that idea of they have this noise in their head and you're just kind of tuning into it and speaking their language. It's as if they speak German and everyone around them is speaking English. So
Sure. Yeah.
you're speaking to
Yeah, we
them
call
in
it
their
ice cream
tongue.
truck music. Some of them have that going on inside of their head, you know?
Yeah, yeah, right.
So we're
That's
going to be
awesome.
able to turn that volume down a whole bunch for sure. And we're food trainers primarily. And so the beautiful part to food is not every dog wants praise, not every dog needs to play, every dog needs to eat. So it really, whether the dog is super timid or coming from a rescue type situation, one of our puppies that's just been weaned off of mom, or a very super aggressive dog, right? That's going to work in very dangerous environments. Strong, when I say aggressive, like very strong temperament and certain that he's better than humans.
Yeah,
I still have to be able to train and handle him, right? And then
right.
transition into somebody else. So food is the great equalizer. Every dog needs to eat. And it allows us to really sort of take the human out of the mix and what I think, because ultimately, if you or I were not here to go to the grocery store, they need to figure out how to eat. So it really is it's a wonderful behavior modification tool. People, I think in general, kind of think of it as being a little bit labor intensive, and it probably is for about the first 3 days. But when we go to the nature nurture model of, hey, I'm the one in charge, I'm the pack leader. You don't have
Right.
thumbs, I get car keys, right? We can order food from Chewy, right? You can't do that. So it gives us that power over dogs, and it sort of resets those difficult dogs and even the puppies. It's amazing because developmentally they are more than a sponge. So when they transition off of mom, the only thing they need mom for is security and food, and they'll take food over security, I promise you.
Yeah.
And so I just become mom and start sort of imprinting all these things, and it's wild. We have puppies at different stages of development. We actually have probably a very, very special dog here, right? That's I don't think the world is ready for what he is, but and things that we imprint in dogs like him at 7, 8, 5 weeks old. I can pop him out at 6 weeks, 6 months old, and they're like, I don't know why I know this, but I know this, right? Because they lack id, ego, life experience. All they want is that food, and it gives me a chance to do very, very high volumes of repetition.
Yeah.
And then when we go from that sort of training stage to proofing stage, the type and kind and amount of sort of force or compulsion that we have to use, there are some levels of it that are necessary, is minimal because the dog has learned to default to do all these positive things. I smell that smell. I smell cocaine. I don't know why, but my butt hits the ground and I sit, and mom or dad gives me food, right? So, so the type and kind of compulsion and force that we use is minimal. So it's way better on the backside. There was some labor intensity to it initially, but on the backside of it, it's minimal. It's less stress for the dog. It's less stress for the owners as well.
Wow.
Sustainable, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, a key piece of that too is you're creating dogs that have the ability to operate independently, right? Like, especially where Kenny used to work, like you can't just be helicopter mom or dad over the dog, right? Especially if you're going to be expecting that dog to be looking for things that go boom. You don't want to be right on top of the thing that goes boom either. So I think that's another key piece that we're trying to kind of bring back into this idea of dog culture, right? Like being able to train and work with your dog so that it can do the things that it needs to do based on its training, rather than having to have you tell it to do every single, thing step by step.
Yeah, so proaction versus reaction, right? What we really see
Mhm.
with dogs, that there's a couple of phrases that I try to crush into folks sort of dog training psyche, is it's when they start offering behavior, right? Where they're doing the learned thing as opposed to the visceral response or the genetic response that little guy inside their in their head is like, we should do this. I don't know why we should do it, but we should do it. And they start offering to learn things.
Mhm.
And then we get that. And there's training saturation, right? Where I know that I've done so many repetitions, because if I give a dog a pat on the head 3 times a day, I've got 3 repetitions. If I give him a ball 4 or 5 times, and again, that's predicated that the dog has enough proper play drive that it desires the ball and is also doesn't want to fight me over the ball. Maybe I get 6 repetitions before it starts. The wheels start to come off the wagon. With food, I get several hundred repetitions a day, right?
Wow.
And so the
That's
dogs are, because it's 1 or 2 pieces of kibble at a time. It's not you sit, you get a bowl of food. We joke, we're probably the old Chester cheater. It ain't easy being cheesy. We use a lot of cheese balls with the puppies, right? Because they're when I'm teaching a dog to use the laser, right, to be directed for
Mhm.
either detection or to go to a specific place to look for a person. These cheese balls glow like they came like Haley's Comet. It's pretty wild. We were showing friends last night, and so but like we use a lot. We use food, right? Food. And we also, one of our sort of famous training isms is one day a moose and one day a mouse, and people are like, well, what does that mean? And it just means that in the end, if in nature, you and I, again, we're not here to influence what they were going to get by portion and the type of portion. Some days they're going to get a moose, some days they're going to get a mouse. But at the end of the week, they're going to be full, they're going to be satiated, right? So we can build that into the training program as the expectation of what, to Carolyn's point, the behavior is going to get more and more complex and difficult. We can use that to influence the dog's motivation some, right? So I call it Milestone Monday, right? So once that dog, if they're trending that entire week, maybe on Sunday we just give them a raw portion of cow bone, right? The flesh on it, but they don't get that. They get all the nutrients they need. It cleans their teeth. It's great for their anal glands, all the good healthy things that nature would want them to have. But on Monday, they don't have that full belly, right? So then I turn the stress up a little bit more and increase expectation, and Mondays suck, right? But all of a sudden, by Tuesday, the light bulb is going from flicker to burn, and by Wednesday, the dog, well, we say it all the time, what we separate about on Monday, we laugh about on Friday, right? And that's that. Food is just brilliant for that purpose.
Yeah, and that variable reward. I've heard of that in other kind of
Sure.
situations.
Yeah,
So
for
they
sure.
don't
Yeah.
expect the same thing all the time. And I don't
Yeah.
know the psychology behind that, but I've heard that about that principle before of the variable reward.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, no, it's a very strong trainingism, right? So, but the food again, I think my dad didn't speak to me for about 6 months when I told him I was training dogs for food. And then he finally showed up to one of the local high schools where I was training, and he stood there with like this for about an hour and a half, didn't say a word, and came over. He said, "I still think you're screwing up, but you look like you're onto something." And then he came back, and it was a gratifying day when we had a private search at one of the local big food distribution places out in Western Mass, actually at Friendly's. And they wanted to do sweeps for contraband in their facilities. And he handled the dog, a food rewarded dog at 70 years old. He did it for me. And so I think I won him over at that point. When he went up and sniffed an entire facility one night. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. It makes total sense. I mean, don't bite the hand that feeds you, right? And even
Sure.
my dumb rescue dogs, they know I'm the boss because I feed them, and they, I don't know. I had a Ridgeback. He was a purebred, a beautiful dog, but he had been through some stuff when he got to me. He was 6. But even he respected me as the boss of the house, and that was
Sure, of course.
we had a good working relationship. And the things that are bred into them now that I brought him up, they were bred to guard the diamond mines in Africa, right?
Sure.
So he would let people in and be okay while they were here, but when they went to leave is when he would go after them. He bit a friend of mine, and he scared the bejesus out of a couple of my daughter's friends, which I was like, you go,
Yeah, perfect, right.
you go, Max.
Especially if they're young boys. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. So interesting, the things that are brought in. And I figured, if he was catching people stealing from the mines, he wouldn't want them to leave. So that maybe it's what that translation was, but interesting to see what all the different dogs, their characteristics are and so on. Is there a typical type of dog you look for in the shelters? Like here, I know there are a ton of
So it's
pit bulls and
probably
pit mixes.
so I think the hardest part with the pit mixes is the stigma that comes with them. I can say it now because I'm long since retired and the dogs are retired, and the chiefs of police that I maybe pulled the wool over their eyes. I would be at the shelter and I would select this great, what clearly was a pit mix, right? And I'd have to take 50 pictures of him and get the right angle so he didn't look like a pit bull
Right.
because his character was so good, right? And so I had a close friend that was a chief down the Cape in Massachusetts, and I don't think I've ever fessed up that it actually was. I told him it was a Basenji and it was close enough for him. But and then when he came to the police station the first, he was like, "You sure that's not a pit bull?" I'm like, "No, chief, it's fine, right?" So, but a brilliant working dog. But aside from those parts of it, then there's some limitations to dogs with shorter snouts, that they don't have the surface area to have a greater, not a greater sense of smell, but olfactory gas, right? Where they have more surface area, gives them, they can search for longer, right? So because they've just got a bigger organ to do it, really. So but the word that I would assign to it, whether it's our puppies that we're breeding, or dogs coming from a shelter, or dogs that are coming in for training, it's character, right? So I can't teach courage and I can't teach character. But if the
Right.
dog has the proper character, and in some cases the professional term we would use is drive or desire, then I can teach it to do anything, right? Because I can appeal to the noise in the head, and do a lot of repetition with food, minimize the amount of force that I need to use, to proof the dog at that point. It's not because I'm, when I would go to speak to, I did it 10,000 times probably in my career, to go speak to school kids. And we would try to get a positive relationship with kids, right? Before they were at risk, or knew they were at risk. And I would always ask the question, well, who knows what motivation is, right? And so people would be like, all the kids would raise their hand. It's like, oh, if I do this, I'll get something. I said, right, exactly, right. So, we on the training side of it, we use high value food for those high spots and difficult spots, and to really enhance behavior. And that might be Monday and Tuesday, I'm the cool uncle, or we're the cool uncle and aunt that are given ice cream cones for all 3 meals because you're staying over Auntie's house. But then by Wednesday, all of a sudden, we put the pressure on the dog and we say, oh, sorry, we're out of ice cream cones, but we do have these saltine crackers, your kibble, right? So, and we gradually decrease the portion of higher value food. And then Wednesday could be a little bumpy, but I promise you by Thursday, they're like, oh, got it, right? So to the point where they will disregard the high value food to get to the lower value food. So, yeah.
I think in people, we would describe it as coachability.
Yes. Yeah, that's the word I was thinking when he was talking earlier. Yeah.
And I think, but to really like explain it just in words, like I wouldn't be able to, like, you'd need to, I think, have to see Kenny like kind of demonstrate, like, okay, here's this and that kind of shows you that this is the dog that has that coachability that you're looking for, as opposed to I'm just gonna run off and do my own thing. But maybe another example would be resilience. Can the dog come back and not just give up on the thing that you're trying to teach it. But just even speaking from my own experience, having rescued a shelter dog, it was completely an emotional decision. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the cutest little puppy sitting here. No one's even looking at her, giving their time of day. I don't want her to get euthanized just because no one adopted her. And I think that's probably typical of most folks, right? Like you see a super cute dog or kitty, and you don't want them to get put down just because the shelters are overrun.
Right.
But I think another part of that thing that you don't think about is, well, if you're going to adopt that dog or cat, you're going to have that dog or cat for a while, unless you make the decision to give it back. So before you make that effectively at least a house situation changing decision, what are those things that you can look for if you've taken the time to talk to someone like Kenny, who can kind of give you some advice and insight as to what things that you should be looking for to figure out, is this the right dog or cat or whatever for me and my family.
Yeah. To fit your own temperament, the time you have, what kind of facility you have for them. Do you have kids? Do you have a lot of people coming in and out? Do you have other dogs? Do you have to find something that's compatible with that? It makes sense. And that would be totally responsible. But, I say people buy houses because of the way it makes them feel when they walk in, and
Sure.
they get dogs for the same reason, right? They
Yeah.
kind of bond with the dog at the shelter. So if you get a manipulative little dog that says, look how cute I am, I'm so lonesome. Right.
Yeah.
I
I
think
think we, I'm
that's
sorry.
just amazing that you've been able to go in and give these other dogs a second chance, and to do something that they probably never ever would have gotten to do
Yeah,
without you.
certainly. Yeah, it's rewarding. Like when you get to the point where you think of like the few high spots, not the hundreds of things that they've done, right? That on a daily basis, right? That make people's lives and certainly communities safer. Yeah, it's gratifying for sure. I think one of the words Carolyn said was sustainability, right? So I think that
Mhm.
we try to make, people look at me kind of funny. It sounds like probably a terrible business model, but I tell people the first day I take their dogs is I want you to never need me again, right? Like there's so much dog training out there that's either trendy or is reactive versus proactive, right? And so like it's the sustainability part for the average person with a busy life isn't there, right? So it becomes these boomerang dogs that are constantly needing to do, something, right? So I think that the industry in some cases can be a little bit predatory in that regard.
Yeah.
So we sort of pride ourselves on being, um, I'll do the hard part for you. I'll do the lion's share. First week is people look at me like, this is all you got me doing with the dog. But then by the second week, and then by the third week, I go from being the trainer to just being the coach. And literally it's a text from somebody that says, oh, here she is doing this. This is what I did to mitigate it. So perfect, you're on the right course, right? So it's that sustainability and training and really breaking it down to its most simple form. Like I want people to know what I know, or at least what I think I know. And so then there's a real buy-in, right? And to use the word bonding, right? And connection with dogs. And so the food affords that, right? People are like, well, I have a busy life. I'm like, can you give your dog, you walk your dog, right? You do this and that with it. Yeah. So what's that take you? 20 minutes a day. So what you're just going to plug that into your feeding. You're not just going to drop a bowl of food. You're just going to break that food up over the day. And people are like, oh gosh, for the first 2 or 3 days, it feels kind of foreign to them because they look at it as being labor. But I used to joke with all my big tough cops when I'm like, oh, I was a Monday through Wednesday, I would show them with their dogs. So they would see it hundreds, if not 1,000 times, what it is that they're going to be doing for homework. And then on Thursday, I would say, show me what you've seen for the last 3 days. And it was like a mess, right? The dog's like, this guy doesn't dance like that guy, right? Or this guy doesn't dance like that girl. But the dog had so much volume of experience in those first few days, several hundred repetitions, they would start to get some results, right? And then Friday it was 50% better. And like, okay, on Saturday, I want you to go home and go in your garage where you're not going to be distracted. Not the dog, but the human are not going to be distracted. And they would come home on Monday, come back to school on Monday, be like, oh my God, I got my dog to sit. I'm like, okay, knucklehead. Now let's go find some bad guys, right? Like, but that very, very simple step of no words, just marking the behavior, right? And not marking it verbally, because again, that's a sort of animal behaviorism. And to Carolyn's point, like, if that dog's 1,000 meters ahead of me looking for a bad guy or looking for explosives, nobody's gonna be telling him what to do. So he's
Yeah.
got to be able to have that free will and independence to be able to do it. And so, building that sort of, hey, I say it all the time, I'm the supermarket, and here's the front door, and my hours are only this and this, right? So if you want that supermarket to feed, man, you gotta play by our rules. And at a certain point, the behavior comes learned, and the offering starts happening. Then the dog is just, it can't not do the positive behavior, right? So,
Yeah.
handsome.
This is Athena. She's a Black Lab Great Dane mix.
Yes, she is.
Definitely see the Great Dane.
Great Dane
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. She is definitely a scheduled feed dog. She lets me know, hey, it's time to eat. She won't let me
Sure.
rest. That's what she's doing right now.
Yeah.
But I'm like, it's only 4 o'clock. It's not going to happen right now. It's too early.
Oh.
But she's just relentless. She's really smart though. And I see what you mean with like the food reward. My little guy, he takes a prescription every day, right? Now I've tried pill pockets, I tried cheese, I tried beef sticks, all these different things to get him to eat. And he would just, no, and he wouldn't trust what I was handing him to eat.
Sure.
So my daughter said, get slices of turkey and roll them up in that. And it was like, oh, voila, that's what he
Yeah.
wanted. Now
Yeah, for sure.
he hears the pills pop out of the little packet and he comes
Yeah,
over
exactly.
and he's ready.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So interesting. And I am by no means a dog trainer, but we have our language and they understand me and they're pretty good for me. I wish I could keep
Yeah.
her from getting on the furniture when I'm not home, but anyway, what you do is just fascinating to me. And understanding the genetics and how elite these dogs really are. And I hope that the art of doing all these things doesn't go by the wayside. I hope it's not watered down permanently. Hopefully they'll, a younger
I think,
generation will come up and
yeah, I definitely think that there's like these renaissance periods that occur. and unfortunately, that generally is borne by some tragic event, right? So, like the need, increases the world that we worked in, certainly for Carolyn on the cyber side and for us on the dog training side, it could change mission to mission, month to month, year to year, right? Because as we start doing our jobs better, the people that we're trying to defeat start doing their jobs better, right? And so, so that's the beautiful part to the sort of higher end part of the military world and law enforcement, certainly.
Mhm.
But yeah, I hope the culture comes back for sure.
Oh,
But
yeah.
my fear is it's going to be born of something that's, all of a sudden we need dogs for the purpose that they were made to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, certainly as we're in this new world of generative AI, there are things that, computers can do better than humans, but there are things that only humans can kind of sort out and figure out and reason. And, but there are also certainly things that dogs can do better than people can, right? Like reaction time, way better. Sense of,
Mhm.
smell, texture,
Mhm.
way better. And so I think, kind of capitalizing on that kind of symbiotic relationship between what machines can do, what people can do, and what dogs can do. There's definitely a there. And I think, grand, big, hairy, audacious goal, grand future is, I think a place where most, breeding or training companies kind of plateau is being able to scale. Maybe we are able to kind of crack that code and figure out how to actually, not make Kenny the last of his generation and, actually have a larger network of folks who kind of adopt the same kind of methodology. And it certainly there's pockets, of folks who think similarly, but I think just generally as a whole in certainly the working dog industry, even more so in kind of pet dog industry, super fragmented. Folks are in their own little tribes and don't really connect because competition's scary, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
I think really for the greater good of, certainly protecting our own military, our first responders, our own just everyday American citizens, it's a gap that needs to be filled.
Yeah. There's definitely a supply and demand thing going on in there. Uh, I don't see the demand going away anytime soon. So
No, and I think I would
hopefully
argue
the
that
next generation will be
unfortunately,
there.
the demand is probably going to increase. Like
Yeah.
the world seems to be on fire a little bit, right? So the Israelis have been doing a wonderful job at showing how valuable and life-saving that their dogs are to them, right? So if you watch the news, you'll probably see something about once every 10 days of how the dogs have saved their lives, right? And actually reduced the amount of force that they've had to use because most people don't want to tangle with a dog. So when they
Right.
know the dog is coming, I can tell you they are jumping up and down saying, I'm right here. I do not want to get bitten by that dog. I will come out and do whatever you ask me to do, right? So, and I can tell you that's just as true in the military world as it is in the law enforcement world. I've seen it and it's a pretty amazing tool. We are, to Carolyn's point, certainly leaders in thought and a bunch in practice at combining the use of technology and dogs
Mhm.
to be
Mhm.
able to harness the thing that one can do that the other can't. One of the things that will always stand the test of time with dogs is their ability to smell. And they don't require signal, and they are immediately adaptable to every environment, and they can work autonomously. All of the technology generally is only as good as its user and its ability to
Yeah.
have signal, right? And the person that's operating it. And multiple times in my experience, hundreds of times where they said, "Oh, there's no bad guy in there. We've literally put millions, if not hundreds of $1 million worth of technology on that area. There's no human there, and we let old Mr. 4 feet go, and in about 10 seconds, we can hear the person yelling, "Please come and get your dog."
Yeah.
So like that, I think there's the next part of one of the things that we focus on is, and we're very fortunate to be connected to that industry as well. It's very, very grassroots levels to be able to use dogs symbiotically with machines
Yeah.
to be able to take a lot of the human out of it.
Yeah. That AI is coming. whether we like it or not, right? So it's best, I think, to jump on and use it as a tool. I think a lot of people are afraid that the technology and everything's going to totally take over and there are going to be no jobs left for people. I don't see that happening. I mean, it'll make some changes, but so did the Industrial Revolution, right?
Sure.
We need to adapt and use these things as tools and use them appropriately. So I can see where technology could work in with the dogs in tracing the gene pool, or making this worldwide community a little bit smaller and helping with that kind of thing. But definitely human element, food element. There are certain things that are involved with training these dogs that a robot just couldn't do, right?
Oh, sure. I can tell you, I have more stories than we have time to tell, but but for sure, everything has its ability to make humans safer, right, and more effective, and minimize, which people were shocked. We did a talk recently down in Boston, and like, no, like, dogs reduce the uses of force that have to be used, because we all inherently know you're not going to be able to reason with that dog. And when you get warned to come out because the dog's coming, I can tell you 99% of the time, people, very violent people that are under the influence, people that are maybe even not of their right emotional state, they will come out because they don't want to deal with the dog. So versus having to put a human in there, and they've only got this finite amount of options and choices to be able to get that person under control for their safety, as well as the person that they're trying to take into control. So yeah, it's when back in the 2010, 2011, when we started using cameras on our dogs for SWAT applications, I can remember everybody looking at me like, "You're going to put a camera on what?" They were terrified of it. To Carolyn's point, they feared what they didn't know. And the first time, I think probably less than 6 weeks later, that we sent my dog with a camera on him, he not only saved all of our lives, but he certainly saved the bad guy's life. When we were standing around debriefing it afterward, everybody was like, "How have we done this without this technology on the dog before?" Right? And 10 years before that, it was the SWAT team saying, "How did we do this without using a dog?" Right? And so and technology is exponentially increasing now, right? So there's a lot of things out there. Carolyn mentioned Blue Force Development Group up here in Newburyport, Massachusetts. They are the evil good guy geniuses, so they're I can go to them with a crazy concept or idea, and I can pretty much have something that's functional in pretty short order. So we're excited about that part of it. We didn't let too many horses out of the barn, but
Very cool.
yeah, we're doing some pretty cool stuff. So for sure.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
I think
awesome.
it's not either or, right? It's the right tool for the right job at the right time.
Right. Yeah. This is like, I'm thinking about Q and James Bond and all the cool little tools he got, I think.
It's funny. I have been definitely blessed at some of the places that I've worked where I could have something written on a napkin that was a crazy concept at breakfast and be holding it in my hand by the end of the day.
Wow.
At least a form factor to be able to do something like that, because one of the tenets of that high level of the military is to produce things that make us more effective, right? And puts us light years ahead of the way that we do things, right? For to be able to be better than our adversaries. And so it was a pretty cool experience. And some of my stuff in the early days of doing that I just run in the garage, and it would look something like I crawled to the trash can to make it, right? But it would be a form factor that eventually would lead to the next thing, that would lead to the next thing, that would lead to something that we could put and make people's lives safer.
Sure. And you get a first draft of something, some piece of equipment, and it needs tweaking and that, and having people available to respond to that so quickly, that would be amazing.
Yeah, we've definitely been blessed to work with the smartest, most motivated people on the earth. So it's humbling to be that fortunate to be a part of that organization, for sure, for that culture anyway.
Yeah. So by raising these elite dogs, you've become, well, I'm sure you're elite anyway to start with. So everybody's having that elite experience that we all wish we could peek in on, be a fly on the wall and see what's going on. We're glad to have you guys out there protecting us and saving our rights and our freedoms. And Grateful, truly grateful for that. Well, what am I not asking? What have I left out? Is there anything else that you think needs to be told, or?
Well, I guess maybe to close out the thought on just recommendations on transitioning veterans
Yeah.
or active duty to soon to be veterans. I think one thing for me is like really just having that kind of plan in place at least a year out, or at least be thinking about what it is that you want to do a year out, so that you can appropriately line up your own funds, your own safety net to make sure that you have the means to support yourself while you're going through that transition. And then definitely like exploring your options. I mean, there are so many things that I found out that were available to me as a veteran that I just really didn't know about until having the ability to talk to other folks who had kind of either recently made the transition, or had friends or family members who'd been able to take advantage of programs like it used to be called VOC Rehab, but now it's the Veterans Rehabilitation and Education Program. Right,
Mhm.
so if you're at least 20% disabled, you can get some additional benefits from through the VA, that are a completely separate pot of money from your GI Bill benefits, like things like that. Perhaps were mentioned, during the standard here your classes as you're getting out of the military,
Mhm.
but really weren't highlighted and are super important for folks, while they're making that very vulnerable transition from active duty to your
Yeah.
civilian life. It is unlike any other job transition. I'm
Right.
not just going from doing this job from company A to doing this job in company B. It's a significant cultural life change that
Yeah.
folks are making. And good on you if you already have your job lined up from day one from exiting, but that's not everyone. And so kind of being able to explore your options, know that GI Bill benefits, VRE benefits are there, because again, like, hey, having some tax-free housing allowance doesn't hurt while you're trying to figure out what's the next chapter in your life. And your first job out of the gate doesn't have to be your forever job, right? Just
That's true.
being able to get yourself, get your feet back underneath you and figure out what's the path for you. The reality is I still have a part-time job, because running a business, takes some capital, takes some time. Certainly the end goal here is to be able to, for both of us to do our, run our business full time. But at the end of the day, we're certainly not like the 18-year-olds who can just go couch surf at at a buddy's house and
Right.
live on ramen. Like we do have kids that we need to feed too, besides ourselves. So being responsible about making that transition journey. But then the second piece of it is you're not alone. There are many veterans who have made that transition before you. And the great case in point is the entrepreneurship boot camp for veterans, right? Like being in a cohort like that, where you have other veterans who are also passionate about starting their own businesses or figuring out how to most effectively grow and improve their business, hugely empowering and impactful. All the folks from my class that you got to meet back in January, we have a signal chat group, and we're constantly letting each other know, like, hey, I found out about this thing, check it out if it's relevant to you. So again, it's like knowing that you're not alone, right? And kind of getting the help that you need. And that's kind of the third thing, right? Like to me, just like my husband had the highest clearance, TSSCI, and really until going into the special operations community, seeking help for things that involve like getting your brain health better, we're really seen as a black mark, certainly coming from like conventional forces. So at least in the special operations community, it was, hey, like everyone here has TBI. Like, yes, of course, you should go seek some help for that. But even like post your transition, like for me, it took like leaving finally active duty to say like, hey, I think I can use some additional help beyond the help that I received while I was in. And now that I'm not, I don't have that additional pressure of, I don't want any markers on my, to come up when I need to get my clearance renewed. I feel much freer to just be able to seek out that additional help to, to help me get through what is, I mean, it's still a stressful, transition. Left active duty in July. Here we are here in February of the next year. Sure, certainly we brought it on ourselves. We wanted to, start a business, which is stressful for anybody, regardless of leaving the military or not. But I think it's important to make sure to take care of yourself, right, in order to be able to handle the additional rigors that are going to come with, fitting back into the regular American, civilian work culture.
Sure, absolutely. Well, so much good stuff in there. I think a big gist of that is have a plan for what you're going to do. Start in advance. Don't do it last minute. Fail forward. Don't worry about the first job not working out or the first thing you do not being the right avenue. What you've done is discover what doesn't work. So find something else for the next step, right? Having that group like you mentioned with your cohort is amazing. And I think that's something that's important is finding some tribe, some community that you can belong to when you get out. Lots of other veterans out there who are missing that sense of community or camaraderie. But you can think of it as mental health work, or you can think of it as like a mastermind group where everybody has different experiences and has found different solutions, and they may be able to help you. You may be able to help them. It doesn't have to have a stigma associated with it. And I think there needs to be more of a, I don't know if it's stigma or if it's, I think I can do it myself, or I'll look weak if I get help or something like that. I think it should be looked at more of as like a decompression. Like when the astronauts land on the Earth, they get into a decompression chamber in the chamber and talk about all the things and get it out and learn how to, work with those feelings that are going to come up in certain situations, right? Have tools to handle those things. And another thought that I had when you were talking about this totally different world, it's nothing like, but sort of like being in the witness protection program. You're taken away from all the people and put into a new weird place, and you don't know anything that's going on, and you have to start all over again, right? And the final thing to point out is they're not alone, right? There are people, there are organizations, there are groups of veterans. Just raise your hand, seek someone. Don't isolate yourself. Don't get so into the self-medicating that a lot of people do. That's a trap. And there's a lot of potential for everybody coming out, right? You can have a great, successful, happy life. You just have to plan for it and make it happen.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is just kind of I wouldn't say, how do I say this? Kind of manage your expectations, right? Like, hey, you were this, go-getter, hard charger in your military environment that you just left. It's going to be different, right? Like don't expect like, day one after, leaving the military that, all right, now I need to be at that very same level, in my kind of plot in life. If you just happen to be rolling right into like an equivalent job in the civilian sector, like fantastic. But I think even if you kind of do find yourself in that place, you may find like, oh, well, it doesn't have the same mission that I used to be able to support and spend my hours, towards, or the camaraderie isn't the same. Like inevitably there's going to be that something that doesn't just quite feel right, but know that it's just a different chapter. And so I think that just kind of comes back down to having that like kind of freedom to know that if you're not okay, it's okay. Get help so that you are, that stronger whole person, and, be able to have that stronger community of other veterans. You're having a supportive spouse also helps. Like, hey, if it's even just going down to the local VFW to have some drinks
Yeah.
with fellow vets.
Yeah.
Something that, you have that connection with, you're not alone, you're not isolated, you're not the only one. I think that's definitely important.
She's telling you
He
it's
says,
dinner
yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Are you hungry? Oh, yeah. Okay. Go get your dish. I wish I could get her to bring it to me. She hasn't
Right.
made that. She hasn't had that Helen Keller moment yet, but anyway, but I really appreciate you guys. I could sit here and talk dogs with you all day long. I know you've got stuff to do and dogs to train, but thank you so much for coming on today and sharing all your wisdom and your knowledge with us.
Of course, Sherri, we're very grateful to be able to be part of your podcast.
Absolutely. So, one of these days, I'm going to go back up to New England in the fall to see the color changes. I want to stop by and see some of your dogs, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, we'd love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Awesome. Great. Well, thanks again for coming.
Thanks, Sherri.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you for tuning in. We're excited about helping ease your transition. If you're needing help or answers, please reach out. I would love to find an expert who can answer the questions in a future episode, or I can connect you with someone for more immediate help. We're here to serve you for a change. Don't be shy. My contact information is right here for you to use.